Welcome. This is the digital agenda space of the Argentine Council for Foreign Relations, where we interview our most outstanding specialists. In this case, we have our consulting member, Ambassador Ricardo Lagorio. Ambassador, welcome to this space.
Thank you very much, Florencia. Pleasure talking to you and being again with the CARI, although in a virtual meeting. No, we are in a different world, definitely.
Definitely. Talking about that, what's your diagnosis on multilateralism and how it's facing this coronavirus pandemic crisis?
I would say that, I first started my career many years ago in the 80s. And my first post was at the United Nations. And at that time, we used to talk about the crisis of multilateralism. So if I tell you that we are still in the crisis, I'm not inventing anything. I might say, sadly, that I'm just repeating what I heard and lived through in those years. But this is sad because many years went by. At that time in the 80s, we were in a bipolar world. Then we moved to a unipolar world. Now we don't know in which type of world we are, but definitely the crisis is still there. And I think that we have to take very seriously not the crisis, but the necessity to build finally a multilateral world. The coronavirus, as many other issues that arise and threaten our daily life, are global issues, and we need definitely global response and answers. And this is not anymore a rhetoric cliche. I would say that this is the very, very first global threat we are facing. Never I would say, in the life and the history of humanity, a threat was suffered by all the countries of the world. And when it happened, let's say during the Second World War, there were less than 50 countries. Now, each and every country of the 193 members of the UN are suffering. But not only the countries, the individual. So this is really the first global threat, the first threat to each and every human being. More than 7 billion of inhabitants and suffering. And that, I think, is what makes this crisis very distinct, very special, and very unique.
How do you think we must encourage cooperation when we have a world that has its frontiers closed? How can we manage it?
Well, first of all, I would say let's go back to the 70s and read again Joseph Nye and Robert Kiohen, Complex Interdependency. We have forgotten that we live in a very, very interdependent world, a complex interdependent world. So first of all, let's make a little bit of theory. Let's go back to Joseph Nye and Robert Kiohen. And by the way, I was Undersecretary of Defense in the 90s, and I had the pleasure to work in some issues with Joseph Nye, who was working at the Pentagon. At that time, he was writing and thinking soft power. But I think that much more important to talk about soft power, hard power, or clever, intelligent power, we need to go back to the basic premise that we are in a very interdependent world. And in the ideas of Kiohen and Nye, interdependency, complex interdependency, meant that there were no hierarchies of issues. Today, still, I would say that in many places, we still live with a culture of a Cold War culture, a Cold War approach to international relations. That's why, for instance, we are talking about a war with the COVID-19. There's no war with a pandemic. So, first of all, let's demilitarize diplomacy. Let's demilitarize uh, uh, political and diplomatic answers to global issues. Then let's try to have a culture of cooperation, because I think that we don't have a culture of cooperation. And that's why I might say, sadly, that in this very crisis, we don't see the necessary answer by global institutions. Although we have a very important leader at the UN, Secretary General Guterres, who is calling for much more multilateralism, much more cooperation. Unfortunately, the reaction by those bodies, the UN, the G20, the G7, the OAS, all the multilateral and regional organizations, I would say that has not been as fast, as quick, and as cooperative as they should have been. So we lack a culture of multilateralism. There is not enough and sufficient cooperation. And I think that that's something that worries me a lot, because unless we go through those underpinnings, the answer is going to be a little bit much more difficult, and the way out. Because definitely into the future, we need to pay much more attention to issues like pandemics than to hard issues of securities. This is really one of the major threats to peace and international security.
Okay, I understand. You told us that we live in a Second World War paradigm. How can we reframe it? Where are the clues where we can find a new path on governance and multilateralism?
Definitely to live, I would say that we have a like a little Bible in the 17 sustainable goals approved at the UN. We have a roadmap, a clear roadmap with issues that have been agreed upon by the international community, solutions, and we have to concentrate all our efforts in tackling those 17 issues multilaterally in a cooperative mood. So we need much more multilateralism, much more diplomacy, not to militarize. Again, the idea that we are at war with a pandemic, I would say, doesn't make a sense. There are no enemies. There are no uh, uh, groups confronting each other. It's each and every human being that has to face this, and it has to face it within his national and international space and in a cooperative mood. Nobody would have imagined 4 months ago that today more than half of the humanity is in quarantine. That's something
That,
unbelievable, unbelievable.
mm,
So let's be very, very, I would say, practical. Let's realize that although there are hard power or hard, yes, hard power threats, not only soft power threats, but definitely that this type of events like the pandemic or ecological events, or even I would say other type of pandemia. What if we have an IT pandemia? Are we prepared to tackle that? I wouldn't say fight that. Are we prepared? Are we psychologically prepared to these new threats? How are we going to continue living once the quarantine is being lifted? We need to go back again to walk on the streets, hugs, shake hands. Uh, so this unfortunately has dehumanized us a little bit. First of all, I would say, and I'm not being romantic. I think that first of all, when we go back, we should pay much more attention to humanism. I always say that two of the three principles of the French Revolution has been put it into practice: liberty and equality. But there's a third one, fraternity, that is hanging around. I think that we need a little bit more of fraternity.
Wow, that was really, really wise to hear. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Ambassador. I really want to thank you to adapt your schedule in Moscow to make this interview with
No,
us.
it's always a pleasure. You know that CARI is my alma mater. I've been there from its very beginning. So it's a pleasure. And Florencia, I think that this type of communications, cyber communications, are fantastic. You're doing a great job. And again, my approach is a little bit more humanistic. And I'm not trying to be romantic, but I think that unless we emphasize fraternity, we are going to go through very difficult times on the future. Florence, and always a pleasure talking with you, CARI, and my alma mater. Pleasure.